I really wanted to add to this conversation about ethical hiring because as someone who works in the world of remote business, this conversation is a hot one. Sometimes when we kind of hear a little bit here and a little bit there, we don't think about the entire story. So as we consider ethical hiring, I want you to stop shaming people for paying their VAs $6 an hour or $5 an hour. I want you to stop shaming people for actually utilizing what's out there. And I want you to consider these things. And for those of us who are abusing the system, I have a message for you. Hi everyone, my name is Zhara-Marie. I am an online business manager helping you scale profit, peace, and productivity in your online business. Now, as this conversation evolves, I think that there are just a few factors that aren't considered when we think about ethical hiring. I think one, we don't think about how these people are entering into these global markets, right? How they're actually pricing themselves. And then three, what does it mean for us as business owners as we grow, right? And how ethics work in this entire conversation. Now, I don't just talk this story because I taught the talk and the walk, okay? And the reason I wanted to actually add to this dialogue is because business was my way into the world stage. I've always said it, business was my way in. It was my insight. I wouldn't have gotten in spaces if it wasn't for business. I wouldn't have made the money that I've made. I wouldn't have gone into rooms that I've gotten the access to. I wouldn't have been able to talk to you if it wasn't because business gave me that room and that leverage. And I remember charging $8 an hour or $7 an hour for the first law firm I was a freelancer for in way back, like over a decade ago. It was $8 an hour. And at the time, I think minimum wage in the state that law firm was in was a minimum wage was, I think, about $20 or $15 or something. It was in that range. So I was getting paid ridiculously low. And I remember those days, and I remember not even I was just so appreciative of the opportunity that I didn't even consider this side of the conversation. And then as I started growing and stuff, and, I started freelancing and I started going into different spaces, I recognized that this was a huge conversation. I also started having different interviews and people would ask me where I'm from, and I would say Jamaica. And I think it would shift how much they wanted to pay for the role because they heard that I was not from the US. Right? Even though I'd have worked with US clients and I would have had a US based portfolio, right? And I think that's where the problem comes in, right? So I want to bring you through the entire conversation. Let us start with the fact that this is always going to be a nuanced topic, always, because different people are coming from different perspectives and our stories color what our reality is all the time, right? And if you're a founder and you are just starting out and you're wondering what's going to make me a bad person, should I just continue doing everything myself and not giving someone this opportunity because it's exploitation? I think you should be the one who's really listening in, right? So context. When we're not from countries that are more economically developed, right? And I'm not even going to list any right here, but when we're from countries that are not as economically developed as other countries, and I say economically developed because the whole other conversation about what developing and developed means, we're not going to get into that right now. But when you're not from one of those countries and you look at what the job market looks like in your country, and you look at what you could possibly tap into if you work remote and you can essentially give somebody else your talent for a smaller amount, but it's still such a great opportunity for you. When we see that as an opportunity, right? Opportunity. And because we see that as an opportunity, a lot of international talent, we're tapping into that opportunity, even though it seems as if it is undercutting what would have normally been minimum wage, right? Now, that's our way in. That's how we get our foot in. A lot of people who are accepting those roles are just starting, they're at entry level, or they actually find that as valuable based on where they live and based on what that can do in the opportunity cost in their environment, right? So they're liking it and they're accepting it, not because they're settling, but because they see it as a way to get their foot in. So they usually take it and they get their foot in, and we use it to build our portfolio, just like anybody who's starting an internship, except we have a lot more leverage because we live in a country that gives us that opportunity. So we have that leverage. So we take it and we use it to building our skills, building our expertise, building our portfolio. We're able to network, and we're able to get into rooms that we wouldn't have been able to get in if we were back home, right? If I was in Jamaica and settling for what the law firms at the time were offering, I was a college student. Nobody was really hiring college students at the time, and I had time and I wanted money. So it was either $0 and not doing anything, not getting any experience, not getting exposure, or $8. That's a very vast difference, because $8 at the time would have been hundreds of Jamaican dollars. That's the difference between not being able to pay for food for the week to be able to pay for food. And I have other friends who have very similar experiences. So that's the first thing I want us to look at. The fact that we now have an opportunity to enter into markets that wouldn't have been open to us before. And we're using this opportunity to leverage access, to leverage experience, to leverage opportunity, right? First thing. And then after that, we can decide that this is a market we want to enter. This is what we're going to be doing. And then we upskill. This is where things get a little tricky. With upskilling and with making sure that our portfolios are good, we have so much experience, we're getting better, we're investing in ourselves. With upskilling, then we now should be able, remember, we should now be able to attract standard rates depending on the market that we decide to play in, right? So that's why I'm like, the conversation is very nuanced, because when you're just starting, you don't have anything to go off and you want experience. And there are just so many people who are in that category. Now, the issue is supposed to be the upskilling, right? What happens after the upskilling when we decide we want to play in the UK market, because we live in a global world. We have, invested a lot of UK resources. Or for me, I decided I wanted to play in the US market. So I invested in US training. I invested in US certifications. I invested in US networking, advertising. So I invested in that because that's the market I decided to play in, which means that I should be able to set my rates because I have a great portfolio. I have built 6, 7, 8-figure companies. I have gone in their operations. I have helped them scale to the next level. And I'm supposed to now use that portfolio that I have, or the case studies that I have in that market, and I'm supposed to be able to price myself the price that that market says is reasonable. Where the issue lies is where somebody says to me, I'm not going to pay that to you, even though I have a budget for that, because you are not American. I'm going to pay somebody who is living and who is a US citizen that, and I'm going to pay somebody who's a UK citizen that, I'm going to pay somebody who lives in Dubai that, but I'm not going to pay you that, even though I have the budget for it, because you live in a different country. And that's where the nuance lies. So the nuance doesn't lie in the initial conversation. In the initial part, we decide, somebody's trying to enter the market. Somebody sees this as such a great opportunity. The issue lies where after we have entered the market and it seems as if now we're able to play the same game. We're just as good because we're no longer at internship level. We didn't come out of the undercut. We're now in the same game. We're running the same race. You decide that we're not going to benefit from the budget that you have allocated because we're from a different country. That's where the issue lies. And I think because those are some of the people who are, at the head of the conversation, and a lot of people are very bold about it, it seems as if we're saying overall that it is unethical to do so. So how do we add color and context to the conversation when we're actually making these decisions on who to hire, when to pay what, should I even pay this, what do we think about? And I always tell the founders that I interact with that I think, as mentioned before, you think about the stage of the game that the contractor is coming in, what their experience is, etc. And if this is their entry into the market to get experience, we accept them, especially if they pitched, right? If they pitched and this is the pitch, you use freelancers like Upwork, Fiverr, and that's the pitch. That's the pitch. 2, I think we should always consider the stage and the type of game that your business is playing. Because when I just started out in business, for example, and let's say you're making $5,000 a month, right? Or $4,000 a month. Really and truly, I need help, I need support to get to my next level. Because in order to get to your next level, you might need some type of website, for example, right? And I know that I can't afford these websites that are for $10,000 and $15,000. So I get somebody who is entry level to help me to build my website. And because they're entry level, obviously I'm not going to get the best of the best, but it's also their entryway and it's their way in. Now, let's say I retain that person to continue to help me with graphics here and there, and I'm paying them $5 or $6 an hour because that's really the stage and the age of the business. I think that as that business evolves and as those profit margins get wider, if I don't try to have a conversation with that person about what that potential increase can look like, I don't think that's ethical, right? And that's just me. So Zara, how can we actually make these decisions thinking about the full context? And I always tell founders that these are some of the things that they should think about. Naturally, we already spoke about entering the market, experience, opportunity, etc. The next thing I want to talk about is the fact that as your business scales, as your business grows, and as you move to the next level, and this person who has been with you when they were charging $5, they initiate a conversation about their workload is more, the demands on their skills are more, they have upskilled by being here, they have done this, that, and that, and they come to you and you say, I don't think you're worth it because you're not from X country. I think that's where the issue is. The issue also lies where you have a job description with a pay grade for a particular role. You said that this role is $25 an hour and this is what you're going to pay. But because the applicant applies from somewhere out of your home country, you reduce what that hourly rate is. No, something is wrong with that, because that now seems that is where the exploitation starts, because you're essentially saying, I have budget to pay up to $25. I have budget to pay $25, but the only reason I'm going to pay you less is not because you're not experienced. It's not because you don't have the portfolio. It's not because you don't have the client case studies. It's not because you don't have the testimonials. It's not because you don't have the certifications or the training. But the only reason is because I know you live in a different country and you're worth less, essentially. That's where the conversation gets murky. And I think being able to differentiate between that and you just having a low budget are two different things, right? It doesn't mean that you can't tap into talent all over the world, because I think that's one of the beautiful things about the era that we're living in. You can tap into talent from everywhere. However, I think we should focus on making sure that we're considering things like our profit margins, how our business takes into consideration what our business can do and can support based on how our financials are and the state of our financials. It should never ever be because a coach told you that this is the best way to go because you can exploit workers from elsewhere. It should never ever be that you have somebody who's working along with you, somebody who has helped you build, and you would rather pay somebody else in another place higher than give that person a promotion because they are undeserving because they're not from your home country. It should never ever be that you see potential for growth, and instead of investing in potential for growth, then you give somebody else the opportunity because that person seems and they present better because they're from a more developed country. You following me? I think ultimately just the color in the conversation is that it's not always very black and white. It's always going to be very dynamic and very different and very intricate for each business. But I think at the end of the day, it shouldn't be because somebody else told you that this is the best way to get the most for nothing. I think the conversation should be, okay, here is what I can do based on what my business financials are, based on what my profit margins are. And let me see where in the world I can get somebody who is talented, who is well resourced, who is skilled, and who can give me the best return on my investment. And that person could be from anywhere in the world. If you're open to that, Or for us, we prefer to hire people who are on the West just because at the type of, we have a very reactive, it's operations, which means that we're always reactive. All of our clients are Western clients right now, which means that I need you on my time zone. So for the positions that are very reactive, we're hiring people from the West. For the positions that are not as reactive and they're more, techie, behind the scenes, just give me a deliverable, then we can hire people from the Eastern side of the world. Do you understand? So we take those things to consideration, because if I only say I'm only hire people who are from the Caribbean, for example, and I'm never going to consider people who are not from the Caribbean, then it must be for a reason other than the fact that I think that this person is going to be demanding less or more of me, Another thing, this is specifically for my international contractors. I know that a lot of times when you see job descriptions, and especially job descriptions from the US, Canada, and the UK specifically, some of the other more developed countries, I am not usually on their job descriptions because I don't speak their language, and also just because it typically doesn't align. So I'm more speaking towards the US, Canada, the UK. Those are the three major countries that I have some experience with, right? And you look on the job descriptions and it says US candidates only, or UK candidates only, or Canadian candidates only. Sometimes we think that that's discrimination, and sometimes we get put off and we're like, why aren't we getting any opportunities? Why aren't we qualified? And the reasoning behind that is, and there are a lot of reasons, but I think number one reason is taxes. A lot of times when you are paying international contractors, it comes with a different rate, and sometimes just based on the structure of their business, it's just a lot more complicated to pay international contractors, right? Another thing too is that when we look on compliance, depending on the type of business, you might need to be compliant in that country, and it gets very, very murky. And a lot of people just don't want to have to go through that, right? So for example, we have a company registered in the US, but we also have a company registered in Jamaica, which is my homeland. So if I am supposed to hire anybody from Jamaica, I am making sure that we're compliant with Jamaican rules, Jamaican legislation, and that we're up to speed, because we have a registered company in Jamaica, and both companies, a US company and a Jamaica company, they're basically funneling a very similar service, right? So those are some of the things that we also have to take into consideration. It's not always because people don't want to hire us or because people are discriminating, but those are some of the things that we'll have to take into consideration. Now, as we thrive in this space called the world of remote work, and as we build these online companies, I just want to implore you, especially when it comes to hiring and team building, I want to implore you to be non-biased. I want to implore you to explore other avenues of filling your talent pool. I want you to just embrace the fact that we live in a big, beautiful world with talented people from all over, and you are living in an era where you can tap into that. That's not something to take lightly, right? A lot of companies are brick and mortar, and they are really tied down to their physical spaces, and because they're tied down to their physical spaces, their talent pool is so limited. But for us, we have such a privilege, and I find it such a privilege that we can have a budget of $200 and get somebody to do it, of $1,000 and get somebody to do it, because there are always people in the world who will be talented enough and who will be resourced enough to get things done. So those are the different areas of I wanted to bring this conversation. I really hope it was helpful. And if you are interested in conversations like this from a founder perspective, to nuances that we need to think about, stay tuned to the channel. We talk a lot about that here. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe, and stay tuned for our next video. Take care. Bye.